Yo, and welcome back to the Banter Boys podcast. My name is Sanji. With me is Chuck. How you doing, boy?
I'm pretty good. It's a weird time of year with international friendlies starting up, but the Olympics also happening basically at the same time. So definitely staying busy.
Yeah, I can imagine. Are you covering anything Olympic-wise?
Yep, since the U.S. men are back in the Olympics, I will be covering them, even though that's just U23s.
Fair enough. So you're a good guy to come to about dynasty information then, if you're following all these kids.
We'll see.
All right, listeners, welcome back to another Inside Trax episode. Let me not ruin the surprise. If you guys already know who Chuck is in our community, you might know who we're going to talk about. But I'll let you do your introduction. Tell us your name, your Twitter handle, the club that you're representing on today's episode, where you're from, and a little bit about what you do.
Sounds good. So I'm Chuck, and I'm on Twitter under ChuckBoofSport, and that's sport, not sports. I'm here to talk about Spurs today, which, yes, as you said, is no surprise whatsoever. I'm originally from Baltimore, Maryland, but I now live in Philadelphia. And I've instead moved from writing about fantasy soccer to just writing about soccer in general for CBS Sports.
Was that a big transition for you?
Not particularly, because because of writing, especially about draft fantasy soccer in particular, there are a lot more things that you take into account than just who's going to score an assist. So, you kind of have to write about tactics and whatnot doing that and keep up with just a whole lot more.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, some would say you kind of have a dream job. So, if there are kids out there that love writing footy, love, doing articles about fantasy football, do you have any advice that you could give to youth, let's say, or anyone at any age, I want to say, should be able to get into this field, right?
Yeah.
But do you have any advice, what you've learned throughout your years being in this industry?
I mean, honestly, the biggest thing is just, if you want to write something, do it. If you don't know where you can necessarily get it published, you can always just quickly build your own website and just put it out there, because eventually someone will read it. Because writing's one of those skills that I feel like you only improve by just doing it over and over and over and over. If I look back at things that I wrote 2-3 years ago, I don't know who the person was that wrote that, because everything's changed so much from me just writing hundreds upon thousands of articles.
Yeah, that sounds like podding, to be honest. I'm almost scared to go back to our first ever episode versus now, where everything is just in a flow. You've got that consistent schedule and things are just automatic in a sense. It's almost second nature. But yeah, I think you bring up a fantastic point, is just start.
Exactly.
All right, awesome. Listeners, just a quick breakdown reminder of how these episodes go. We usually have 3 sections. First section's a bit of a general discussion. We're going to talk about the impact of the new manager versus old manager. But I mean, Ange is still there, so maybe we'll find out if anything has kind of changed in the club hierarchy, maybe some coaches here or there. Then we'll talk about the previous season's performance versus new season's expectations. We'll talk about old system versus new system, basically the impact of the transfers that has happened during the Ange era and, whatever they're expecting for the season coming. Then we'll pick Chuck's brain about expected formation and starting 11. Obviously, we're going to chat fan tracks, which is our segment after. So we'll get Chuck's draft advice, basically his first pick from Spurs, his next 3 picks, at least one hidden gem, and we'll pick a trap asset as well. And then finally, we'll round things off by getting advice from Chuck based on his years of playing Fantrax. Talk about whether or not he trades draft picks, how he does his waiver claims, if he budgets fab, and maybe some of his best and worst trades in his career so far, or even just last season in general, right? So yeah, I think we might as well get started then. So a few points that, looking back at last season, you had no European football last season. No Kane. no gain. I don't know. That's usually a bit of a pun that people like to throw around. But I don't know. You guys started the league by a storm. Like you grabbed it by the scruff of the neck. Like first 10 games of the season, you were undefeated. It looked like you were storming your way to a possible title race, and then everything kind of got derailed at that Chelsea game, right? So let's talk about Ange. One of the managers that I think he won the most Manager of the Month awards as well, if I'm not mistaken. I think he won 3, got nominated for 1 in March. So yeah, what are your thoughts about Ange, and what else has changed at Spurs since his appointment?
Yeah, it's always such a funny thing looking back at last season, because overall, I'm extremely pleased with the season. My prediction going into the year, especially without Kane, was that Spurs were going to finish 8th, and they finished above that. So I'm happy.
Yeah.
But it's like, if he had the exact same season that he had in reverse, people would be going into the season with a completely different, just like frame of mind. But you have to take into account, just with how many injuries that Spurs had, the fact that there were so many red cards and suspended players by the end of the year. Like, it was pretty hard to put out anything close to a first choice squad. And I still am not sure he actually knows what his first choice squad is, which is where this preseason is going to be extremely interesting, because now in year 2, that's kind of when he knows who his guys are. Some, but realistically not enough of the dead weight has been moved on. But you are closer to being able to see who Ange's guys are. And also, just the way Spurs play is not only pleasing to watch, but it's also very useful for fantasy. Yeah.
I mean, it's quite a drastic change from Conte ball to Ange ball, eh?
Oh yeah, I mean, I don't think you can get much more night and day than that.
Yeah, exactly. So, has anything changed in the club hierarchy, or maybe you guys got a new set piece coach or anything along those lines that you think maybe could play an influence on the assets that we're looking at or considering for next season?
There were a couple of new assistant coaches that came in, but I don't believe there was anything major. I mean, the one thing that Ange and his staff have to work on in general is the conceding of set piece goals. Just because with the way that Vicario plays and comes out to punch on every corner kick, it does not bode well. And I mean, he publicly has talked about how he doesn't particularly care, but I don't think that's the case, because no manager wants to just give up free goals.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, we touched on, how you guys performed last season. Now you're back in Europe as well, right? So there's that extra burden. And we've seen in the past before, when teams are thrown into Europe, after a little bit of a break even, they tend to have a bit of decline, especially in terms of Fantrax output and stuff like that. For example, prime example I would say is Brighton, right? I know it was their first ever season in Europe, so they had way more to kind of adjust to in that sense. But are you expecting some sort of drop-off in that sense for next season?
Not particularly, just because I think, at least in a lot of key positions, the biggest thing is it's probably not the case in defense yet, but at least in attack and in midfield, there are a lot of just interchangeable options that aren't necessarily downgrades from the first option. I think really outside of Son, Madison, Pedro Porro, Romero, every other squad option is about the same. So it's just really, if you can avoid major injuries to your core players, and of course that wasn't the case last year when even James Madison went down and missed a lot of time, then I don't see Europa League being too much of a burden, because the good thing is, for the most part, depending on the group you're drawn into, you also don't need to start your first team in Europa League. Yeah,
exactly. Do you think, though, Ange would try and take that tournament seriously, or do you think we're gonna focus on trying to get back into the Champions League again? Like, what's the feeling among Spurs fans, you'd say?
I think it'll be both. Because I don't see why, based on the fact that just for every manager, it's win a trophy somehow, no matter what you have to do it. I don't see why they would be like discounting any trophy. But also, when you look at just the state of the Premier League as a whole, you have to go for top four because we don't know exactly what we're going to see from Liverpool this year. Chelsea, Man United are vulnerable. If you want to talk about teams that are going to get decimated by being in Europe, look no further than Aston Villa. Yeah. So like you could have at least 2 spots in the top 4 just up for grabs this year. Yeah.
Yeah. Fair enough. All right. I want to look back to and like the next couple of sections of this segment, like talking about like old system, new system, like expected formation. I do want to talk a little bit about, you know, the assets like as far back as the last summer window, right? So first name that comes to mind, Brennan Johnson coming in from Nottingham Forest. What are your how did you think that he performed last season, and what's your expectations of him next season?
So he's a funny one because I mean I liked what I saw from him every time he was on the pitch, but then looking back at his actual stats, did a lot better than I thought he did. Because he had 10 assists and 5 goals, and even in his career prior to last season, he only had 3 assists in his entire career because he was just more of a goal scorer that would cut inside and score. So it is something that tells you just about how his speed and passing abilities does fit in well, because I feel like at least 3 times a game, a midfielder or a center back is going to try a ball over the top to him on the wing, and then it's just, is someone open in the middle to meet that cross? And if they are, 10 seconds and there's a goal. Yeah. He comes across as like a great squad player, great team player. He does all the simple things right, but I do think that he can't do it on his own. He needs a good supporting cast around him in that sense. Definitely. And I mean, and that's one of the things where it was with signing him, where because he is so young, he is a project that needs to develop more about his game. Because like, he's not someone that you want actually like getting on the ball like a ton during the game, but he can drag defenses so much and just make things happen that you almost want him to really make that right wing his own. Yeah, exactly. A couple of other names, Ashley Phillips and Alejo Veliz. Am I assuming these are more youth players, dynasty sort of picks? Phillips is curious, just because with Eric Dyer officially gone, there really are, like, there's really only 3 center backs in the squad, so someone kind of has to end up there. Because the fact that there was a point during the year that Emerson Royale played center back last year tells you all you need to know about how depth defensive spots are up for grabs. And Ashley Phillips is someone with a lot of talent, but even it was weird because in Spurs' first preseason friendly against Hearts, their center back pairing was Oliver Skipp and Archie Gray. Oh my god. That's pretty grim. Yeah, so anything could happen. Hopefully Romero, Mickey van de Ven, and Radu Dragusin are healthy for the majority of the season. Yeah. But after them, things get a little weird. Yeah. I mean, like you mentioned, Mickey van de Ven was another one of those transfers last summer. He's been a revelation. Oh yeah, I mean, when the standard back 4 is healthy, like, yeah, I mean, Spurs are going to concede goals just because of the way they play, but I have no concerns over the starting 4 defenders whatsoever. Yeah. I mean, we will definitely touch on that a bit later. But
yeah, Mickey being one of the fastest centre backs in the league, has a goal in him as well. It's just unfortunate the timing of his injuries last season, right?
Yeah.
But you'd expect and hope that, you know, he has a full fit season next season as well. So yeah, lots to expect from him. Manus Solomon, another name. He had some serious Fantrax potential when he got minutes. But again, another one of those injury situations, right? What's the status with him and Spurs moving forward?
I mean, he's back. It's interesting to see where he fits in because he kind of feels like he's probably going to be the starting Europa League left winger because he does have the unfortunate reality of his best side being Sunside. So his actual route to regular Premier League minutes just isn't there. But he's one of those guys that you're going to need to be paying a lot of attention to just over the course of the season because if there's an injury, like let's say Richarlison goes down and Son needs to go up top, he's going to immediately become one of the number one waiver claims just because of the potential that he has. Agreed,
100%. James Maddison also coming in last window. I feel like the community and managers last season were a little harsh and impatient regarding James Maddison's output and performance, especially for his debut season.
Yeah, I mean, he's another where it was just like very unfortunate with the timing of his injury. Because I mean, even for a brief period, he was leading the Premier League in assists, and every time he's on the ball, he makes something happen. But even when he came back later in the season, it just didn't feel like he ever got fully healthy. And I know this has been kind of the story of James Maddison's career, and that's also a problem. But like, he's still such a talented player when he's on the field that you still kind of have to draft him.
Yeah, agreed. And I kind of am, chanting and hoping for a bit of a comeback season for him for the upcoming 24-25 season, especially after being shafted for the England Euros. I feel like there's that extra motivation, fire in his belly to kind of prove a point.
And also, I think going into the season with the fact that, like, of Euros and Copa America, players like Maddison are who you want to be taking a look at anyway, just because he's played fewer minutes than a lot of other players, so he is going to be fresher to actually start the season.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. Next midfielder, Dejan Kulusevski. I think he first showed up on the scene through a loan agreement. I think this was during the Conte time. He showed proper glimpses of, like, you know, I think majority of football fans would have seen him on an international level for Sweden and seen what he's capable of. He showed glimpses of it under Conte, was inconsistent, in and out. And I mean, I don't think that's just him performing poorly. I think that's also Conte just being crazy at times. But you even saw it last season as well. Like, he did have that inconsistency. He was in and out of the squad. Like, I don't know what to expect from him, because I think last year during the draft he was going maybe round 2, round 3.
Yeah, and I think, like, realistically, I can't tell you what to expect from him because I don't even know if he's a winger or a 10 right now. And I don't know if Ange knows that either. So because it's like that's the biggest thing that you need to figure out there, because it doesn't feel like he's dynamic enough as a winger for this system. But then the additional creativity that's needed for a 10, like, he can do some of it, but it's still just tough to figure out, like, where exactly he fits into the lineup. And I feel like he's a guy where if an offer came in from elsewhere, I wouldn't be surprised if Spurs sold. The problem is only 5 teams in the world actually have money, and Spurs somehow happen to be one of them. So everyone wants them to buy their players instead of actually buying players from Spurs.
Yeah, Yeah, and I mean, listen, Kulusevski is way too talented to stay on the bench for too long as well, right? So, in a way, it's kind of a good dilemma for Ange, but not a good dilemma for us Fantrax managers.
Oh, yeah.
Last name from that summer window, Vicario. Very pleased with his debut season.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he's great. I have no issues with him being my keeper number one, just because, again, with the way that Spurs play, they invite a lot of shots. Yeah. Most of those shots come from outside of the box and lead to easy saves for him. So even when he doesn't keep clean sheets, he's still going to score more than well enough for Fantrax.
Yeah, exactly. Let's go to now the winter window. Two names there that jump out to me. Timo Werner. There was a lot of mixed reaction, I want to say, to his arrival back in the Premier League. We all know what he did for Chelsea and how frustrating he was. And speaking as a Chelsea fan, I can tell you firsthand, I do think that people, again, were being too harsh on him. Again, it's a foreign league. It's your first time. It was during the COVID period as well. I think he has very positive traits. Obviously, I understand maybe in the final third, he can be very frustrating, especially from a finishing perspective. He should be scoring more goals maybe, but is Timo now back at Spurs in a more permanent basis?
So yeah, he's back on loan again. I don't see why that loan won't be made permanent, even if all he does is what he did last season. Because even at his absolute worst, Timo Werner is a very useful squad player. When you're able to bring him off the bench against a tired defense and just say go, like it just adds so much pressure. And even it's not like he wasn't productive for Spurs when he was on the pitch either. Like, I mean, yes, there always is going to be the case when you would rather he passes instead of shoots, but like at this point in his career, he is what he is. And at least if he's going to take more shots than he should, he's doing it on a team that basically takes 20 plus shots a game. So there's plenty to go around for the other attackers.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, his pace is lethal. Absolutely lethal. Another name, Radu Dragusin. We talked about the depth at centre-back, right? Dragusin, I thought, had a decent tournament for Romania as well at the Euros. What are your expectations from him next season?
Yeah, he's definitely going to play more next season. Hopefully not in defensive midfield, how he came on at times at the end of last season. But I mean, I get it was kind of at a point where there weren't many other options. And also, he was a player that needed to be rewarded for his good form by playing him somewhere. Because he is like too talented to sit on the bench. But he's going to be one of those big gainers of being in Europe, just because of the fact that he's going to get minutes in competitions. Now, again, it might not be the Premier League that he gets those minutes in, but he's going to get minutes. Yeah.
All right. And now fast forward to our current window. And listeners, we're well aware that, we're recording fairly early into preseason. There's a lot of transfer activity that could yet happen. But a couple of names, and these are more for, I think, Dynasty fans out there. One name that has really popped up recently during your preseason games, Lucas Bergvall. He has apparently been lighting it up, but did he pick up an injury or something as well?
Yeah, he did leave the last preseason friendly early. I'm not sure if that was precautionary or if it's actually a concern. Based on the fact that I don't know, leads me to think that it's not truly a concern. But also with the fact that he's so young, I wouldn't be surprised if they take their time with him, especially since it's not like he's immediately needed right now. But he is very interesting to watch because James Maddison doesn't really have a backup at all. And he seems to, even though it's very early and he obviously is going to have a lot to learn, he might be the most creative midfielder in the squad after James Maddison. This is assuming that Giovanni Lo Celso gets sold. Because all signs seem to be pointing at him not returning to Spurs this year. But as we've seen, there's always a very long list of players not returning to Spurs, and somehow half of them still show up on the squad when the season starts. So I can't fully believe that he's gone until he's gone. But Bergenthal is going to be a very interesting guy to watch, and like especially around like the festive period, you might want to just put in a flyer of a claim just to make sure you're not fighting for him if he does make his way into a lineup.
Yeah, so I guess like Madison owners especially, like that's like a tidy handcuff around the festive period.
Exactly.
Yeah. Final name, Archie Gray. Anything to talk about?
So I mean, based on what I've seen from him with Leeds, if he can make the jump, I mean, he might be a top 4 central midfielder in the squad pretty early. Okay. Because, like, again, even though he is young, he has so much more experience than the average 18-year-old after starting in central midfield for a promotion contender during essentially the entire season. And Leeds also plays a very similar style to Spurs when it comes to quick passing, working to win the ball back, starting counters as fast as you can. And there were the points during last season in which, like, kind of you ended up playing like too many defensive midfielders for Spurs because in Bendencourt, Skip, Basuma, there's a lot of similar qualities. And so being able to bring someone who is a little different and better on the ball out there could do a lot. And so Archie Gray, I really do think he's going to get more chances than people think early on. I don't think that's going to mean anything to him necessarily being useful for fantasy because at the end of the day, he is just a deeper defensive midfielder and they rarely score well in Fantrax. Yeah. But it could mean a lot in making Spurs more cohesive as a unit.
Yeah. Yeah, I could only imagine how frustrating it was last season when you saw 3 CDMs playing in midfield.
Yeah, I mean, literally, once Madison went down, it was just like, oh, so Pedro Porro's job is advancing the ball everywhere.
Oh, man. So, are there any other names you want to touch on before we move forward? Anyone you think we've forgotten or you'd like to highlight?
At least transfer-wise, not that I can think of. The big thing that's always something to watch is, at least so far during preseason, Dane Scarlett is back with Spurs from loan, because there still are no real recognized strikers around these parts. I didn't think that we would be entering now season 2 without Harry Kane, without a true number 9 in the squad. I mean, that might actually be Richarlison's position now, but still, and he's been perfectly fine as a 9, but you still need more than one.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, even the days of, I think you guys had Marcos Llorente, the Spanish forward, right? At least then you had, like, some level of depth, right?
Exactly. And now it's literally just, your starting striker goes down, so you slide your starting left winger to striker.
Yeah.
And then, if he goes down, then Timo Werner's your striker. And no one wants that.
Yeah, it then becomes, I think, a bit predictable in terms of how do you play against them, right? Because I think every squad, it's kind of useful to have that big, tall target man up front just to change the dynamic of the game or give you the option of changing the tactics as well mid-game, right? Let's say.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so then why don't you talk about the expected formation starting 11 for majority of next season? And maybe how do you think that's going to function in terms of the system?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's going to be basically the same as last season where it was kind of a mix between 4-2-3-1, 4-3-3, just depending on what midfield personnel are actually available.
Yeah.
So I mean, the back five is just set. You know who they
Yeah.
are. Because I mean, you're going to get Vicario, you're going to get Destiny Udogie, Mickey Van de Ven, Christian Romero, Pedro Porro. That's just set completely. And then midfield is where things just are so up in the air.
Yeah.
I would assume day one, if everyone's healthy, is probably going to be Basuma Betancourt. Just because when it comes to passing, that's at least like still probably your midfield early on with the most passing range. But that's exactly why, depending on how things go, and with Betancourt's injury history now, why like Archie Gray is going to end up having his chances in midfield. And then, and of course, whenever healthy, Son, Madison, and then at least right now, I would still start with Brennan Johnson on that right wing. I wouldn't be surprised if it's Kulusevski, but I would start with Brennan Johnson there. And then all roads go through Richarlison at striker.
Yeah. I mean, I think Rich can do a job. We saw last season as well. Yes, I mean, it's unfortunate he was struggling with his mental health issues. It's glad to see that, he was able to come out about it and, get help as well. But we then saw him hit a bit of a purple patch where he couldn't seem to stop scoring for like a run of 6 or 7 games. So, I mean, the hope is that he at least starts the season with that form, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, and when it comes to like mentality, like now that he's like gotten kind of his personal issues settled, Richarlison's exactly what you want in a striker. Like, yes, he's going to miss his chances, but he's going to be right there to take the next one, and you never know if that's going to end up going in the back of the net. And he's good being able to take chances with his head and with his feet. Like, he's not the fastest at the 9, but like with the way Spurs play, they don't really need a fast striker because they're going to create so much space with just the way that they pass the ball around.
Yeah, exactly. All right, awesome. Shall we move on to the fan track side of things then?
Sounds good.
All right, Chuck, tell us, who's your first pick from Spurs?
So, I technically have 2 answers for this because my answer is who is going to actually be the first pick from Spurs here, and that's Son. Like, and it's even with Son taking a step back, and apparently some of that was injury related last season, because I know he did undergo like a minor surgery at the end of the year, and hopefully is going to be back to who we know he can be this year. Like, he's kind of just one of those guys that when he's there at the end of the first round, you don't have a choice but to take him.
Yeah.
I feel like the first pick from Spurs should be Pedro Porro.
Really? Wow. Very interesting.
So, because when you look at everything around defenders for the league, I mean, there's a very strong argument for him being like defender 1 overall full season this year.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we know his attacking potential. We know he can take set pieces quite well. He also, the adjustment to the fan track scoring this season is beneficial towards defenders as well, right? So I see all the arguments for it. I honestly didn't expect it. I do expect fully for him to be a top asset this season again. But over Son, that was definitely unexpected. So, I mean, okay, let's say it was Porro versus Son. Which round, though, would you be taking Son, and which round would you be taking Pedro Porro?
I mean, if you want Son, you had to take him in the first round. I would prefer taking Son in the second round. I'm comfortable taking Porro in the second round. Most people wouldn't be. But, like, especially if I am outside of the top 20 picks, like, I'm perfectly fine taking Pedro Porro there. More realistically is he goes in the third round after still, like Trent Alexander-Arnold and Andrew Robertson.
Yeah.
But I think with just where things are trending, and again, just the unknown with Liverpool, and the fact that so far in his Spurs career, Pedro Porro has also been pretty healthy and available. Like, he doesn't miss very many games. And the taking over some corners now was a very interesting development, especially when you're doing that on a team that actually has set piece threats too.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so then if we're gonna put Son and Porro on the shelf there, do you have 3 other picks you can suggest?
So I mean, I want Richarlison. I'm struggling to figure out like where to take him, because I would want him in the 5th round. I feel like I would probably need to take him in the 4th round, just because like he is a starting striker for a team that could finish in top 4, and those just come at a premium. After that, I mean, I would like as much of Vicario as I can in all my leagues. And I'm also, just because of like where Porro is going to go as a premium, getting Destiny Udogie probably 2 to 3 rounds after that, in like the 5th or 6th round, is still going to end up being really good value, even if I don't feel like he's as dynamic on the other side.
Interesting. Okay. So it seems like, to me, I'd be telling Fantrax managers, don't get too hung up about not getting your Heung-min Sons, or even possibly your James Maddisons in like a round 2, because there's still value later on from the other Spurs assets.
Exactly. And especially since like, because like if you take James Maddison, you almost immediately want to get another Spurs attacking midfielder. Just because you're gonna want that coverage for whenever he ends up missing games. And if you start with taking any of the wingers, then you literally don't have a choice but to get another winger, because you couldn't pick who's gonna start.
Yeah. So like Kulusevski, for example, that's the first name that comes to mind if, I already got Maddison in my draft. But where are you taking Kulu? Because he's in this weird unknown of will he play, won't he play?
He's a guy, with even just based on the way that he scores when he does play, I'm just comfortable not taking him. Because, he might get you 30. He might also get you negative 0.5. So, like, you just, like, because just being a guy who can completely go absent from scoring when he's on the pitch, and a rotation risk is just too much risk to incur for someone who's going to be taken in the top 6 rounds almost everywhere. Yeah,
definitely. So it sounds like Son is 1st round, Maddison 2nd round, Porro 3rd round, Richarlison 5th round.
Yeah.
What about your hidden gem?
That's where we get back to Brennan Johnson again. Just because, I do think that he's going to end up taking the majority of starts on that right wing, and you can probably get him around the 6th round, which where you're seeing where other Spurs attackers are going, makes a lot of sense for getting still invested in an attack that's gonna be among the best in the Premier League.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm very torn, because I feel like in that 6th round, do I gamble on the upside of a possibly rotated winger from Spurs, or do I, let's say, go for... I don't know if he's going to fall this late, but like, let's say like an Ethan Pinnock from Brentford, like a defender is going to start every single game, right? Yeah. Sorry, what were you going to say?
I was saying that, and that's like why doing draft advice is hard, because it really just depends on how your actual draft is going. Because, like, if you've already gotten nailed on assets in, like, the first 4 to 5 rounds, there's no reason not to gamble on upside in the 6th. Yeah. Because you want to find, okay, I know who my guys are, but this guy, if he does what I think he can do, he could be a third round value. And if he doesn't, he's still going to be useful.
Yeah.
And just sit on my bench and be rotated in. And then if he does end up like going off for a couple of games, maybe he has trade value too.
Yeah. Very true. All right. Finally, a trap asset from Spurs.
See, that's something that's funny because you've already seen my answer to that going into the actual rundown, and it's just any winger. Because it's hard to just say one, because like in some ways, like Son is a trap asset. Like you don't know if you're actually gonna get first round value out of Son, but he's gonna go that high. We don't know who's gonna start on the right wing, and there's 3 guys that could do it depending on the game. And so it's just like, especially with adding Europe into the mix, there is gonna be rotation, and you have to tread cautiously with your squad management when taking these wingers, even though they all have to be drafted.
Yeah. So it seems like a high risk, high reward sort of vibe at Spurs this season.
Oh yeah, but I mean that fits in just about right with how they play.
Yeah, that's very, very true. All right. Anything else you want to mention with regards to Fantrax assets that we might have overlooked that you would want to suggest to managers for next season to keep an eye on?
It's not really one specific asset, but I'm very Ipswich curious.
Okay.
Just because every time that they've taken a step up, they've still been able to essentially keep their same style and still be competitive. And while it's definitely the hardest to be able to do that going from the Championship to the Premier League, we have seen instances of teams coming up from the Championship. Like, you look at Leeds, you look at Wolves, you look at not really Brighton initially, because Brighton under Chris Hughton was an absolutely terrible team to watch. But like, you look at those teams that come from the Championship without fear and actually play on the front foot, and they have consistently outperformed how you would expect them to perform. And I know there are some similarities, unfortunately, with like this Ipswich side and like Burnley last year, after Burnley took the Championship by storm and got promoted. But tactically, they are much sounder than Burnley was.
Yeah. And you'd hope that McKenna's a bit more flexible than Company was, right? I appreciate you've got a philosophy, but you also got to understand that you're in a completely different environment. Sometimes you just have to adjust.
Yeah, and he seems to know what he's doing. I mean, you can't really adjust until you have to, and he hasn't really been forced to, but it'll be definitely something to watch there with that team. Okay,
awesome. So now let's go into the final segment. We're going to pick Chuck's brain for a little bit before we send him off. So, do you trade draft picks at all?
Nope. I don't I don't even bother with listening to offers for draft picks, because the draft is already such a crapshoot that just like using your assets to move around in the draft just is like, you're literally just stacking one unknown on top of another. And like, I know kind of everything with Fantrax comes down to like risk appetite and how much risk you're willing to incur. And moving around draft picks, unless you're someone who just consistently has always had solid drafts and know that going into things, like, if you have more picks in better rounds, you're just going to do better, just isn't worth the risk of potentially sending all your fab out the door before the season even starts.
Yeah, true. Very, very good point. Waiver FA claims, when you make them on a week-to-week basis, do do you weigh form over fixtures, over form, or a bit of both?
Usually fixtures over form. Just because like let's take last season. If someone was playing Sheffield United, it didn't matter how they were performing going into playing Sheffield United. That team conceded a historic number of goals. Yeah. And I mean there are some cases where if you can pinpoint, okay, the form of this team is because of X and that thing is changing going into a game, then yes, that's when you like throw it out the window. But also you can't completely discount form as well, just because like there are going to be certain situations where like, okay, this player's scored like 4 goals in their past 5 games. You always want to know how and why they did that, because like because all goals are not created equal. But if there's enough there to say that they should still keep doing it, then you should be claiming them.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful line. All goals are not created equal. That's like a great bumper sticker to have in a car, I think. So in terms of Spurs assets, going into the start of next season, do you have any names that you would potentially be trying to buy low, or names that you could potentially, draft early but then sell high, maybe after a month or two?
I mean, I mean, you're gonna want to look at Richarlison for that, honestly, just because if he starts off the beginning of the season with like 4 goals in his first 6 or so games, there's almost no reason not to sell him. Just because there's nothing in his career that says that that's going to be sustainable. And even there's just the fact that like at some point Spurs are going to buy a striker. We don't know when that's going to be, but they could be a team that from January to now is very different, just because of the fact that like they do have money to spend but it's just like waiting for the right opportunity to do that.
Yeah. There's no way in hell you think an Arsenal fan like Ivan Toney comes to Spurs, do you? Because I mean, he seems like he could fit the bill potentially.
I mean, I think he would. But I just don't know if his price is going to come low enough for Spurs to actually pay it.
Yeah. I mean, listen, if they don't have any buyers, they're going to have to eventually drop that price, right?
Yeah, and that's the thing when it comes to like Spurs in the market, because it can be very annoying because they just wait some more to do their business. Yeah. But like usually it works out. Like even Archie Gray, for example. Like, he was someone who was linked to a lot of top Premier League teams, and Spurs just waited there until the day that Leeds basically had to make a sale to, like, clear their books for the new season, and came in and finalized the whole thing.
Yeah, fair play. You use Fab, right? I think, are we in a league together again this season? I think we are.
Yeah, we are in a league together this season.
Yeah. So, I mean, you have experience with Fab. We've played in leagues in previous seasons as well. What's your experience using Fab? Like, what's your advice? Any lessons learned in that regard that you can share?
So it kind of just depends on kind of the situation of what's even going on with the actual market, because like. This is like a very weird season that we're going into, because usually you would expect like, okay, there might be like a big transfer coming in on deadline day. Yeah. This year doesn't feel like that.
It feels like the opposite, really. Like big names are gonna be leaving.
Yeah, and like I don't, and it makes it a little weirder because usually you're prioritizing actual transfers with your Fab and then saving it for injuries. But like this year, depending on how things go, it actually might be better to just use it as a trade asset. Because if you're managing your waivers appropriately and at least looking out to, okay, this is a player who, while they're not really at their best right now, I see like 5 of their next 6 games are against bottom half opposition, and like a couple of those are also at home. So I just put in a flyer and got them for free. Well, now you already have them for free instead of potentially spending $5 on them 2 weeks down the line. And if you can use that $5 to be the difference in moving in a trade for a better asset, it might be the way to go. Just because it just doesn't feel like the transfer market's gonna get moving.
Yeah. So in that sense, you're suggesting maybe spend it wisely throughout the entire season and maybe not just splurge on some shiny new toy.
Exactly. Now, I mean, if you're in a situation where you can still like kind of use all of it to pick up an established first round asset, then like definitely do that.
Yeah, fair play. Yeah, definitely. All right, and I think final question. Oh no, there's a couple more, but best and worst trades, or maybe FA pickups or waiver pickups. Let's just focus on maybe last season, unless you have something more memorable.
Well, so I feel like trades, honestly, once I've made a trade, I try to just forget that it even happened. Just because like you spend too much of the season like trying to evaluate if a trade was a good trade, and also depending on what was involved in the trade, like you might end up in a scenario where then you have to take into account like waiver claims and all kinds of stuff to figure that out. But I mean, definitely one of my worst waivers ever was spending all of my money on Gareth Bale.
No, what happened there?
But just when he came in on his transfer to Spurs and was supposed to do things and didn't.
Fair enough. But I mean, did he not have like, was it towards the end or something? He was like scoring goals for fun or whatever. Did you just time it poorly or something?
Oh yeah, no, it was all timed very poorly. Because, I mean, it was, because once, like, 2/3 of your season have already been useless, it doesn't really matter how you end it, because you've already lost me enough games.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I mean, listen, even though I'm a Chelsea fan, growing up watching the Premier League, definitely Gareth Bale was one of my favorite players watching, playing football, so... Yeah, I mean, I might have made that pick myself, so I wouldn't beat yourself up too much. And finally, throughout all your years of playing Fantrax, being part of the community, what lessons have you learned as a manager that, you're taking forward into next season to try and do better? And what's some, advice you would share with both managers that are playing Fantrax for the first time or same as you have been playing it for a few years?
I mean, the biggest thing is definitely just that, at least in the beginning of the season, patience is important. Because, like, you drafted these players for a reason. And unless there's something extremely glaring that makes you feel like you made the wrong pick, there's, like, no real reason to move off of players that you drafted, especially highly, in the first 5 weeks of the season. But then, once it gets later in the season, though, that's when you kind of almost need to, like, switch to being ultra aggressive, because a win right now is much more important than having that player 2 weeks from now, once you're inching closer to playoffs and trying to clinch, like, league titles and whatnot. Like, the stakes are just different then.
Yeah, it's weird. You kind of have to find that fine balance between the two, because I mean, your point, it reminds me of last season when I got Doughty, I think late in my draft. He didn't start the season, right? I think it was Giles that was in his place, and I was like, this is like 2-3 games in the season. Do I drop him? Eventually, I dropped him, and that might have been one of my worst decisions last season.
Then he immediately became one of the best assets.
And it's exactly what you said, right? Is if you truly believe in all the prep that you've done, all the work that you've done going into the draft, if possible, try to be as patient as you can. Because, I mean, trust your work, right? Trust the data. Yeah, just be patient. Yeah, exactly. So that's perfect. All right, Chuck. That's all we had planned to talk about, listeners. Are there any final words you want to leave with us before we sign off? I mean, we're obviously gonna bring you back on air like we did last season. We'll try and do some mid-season interviews and catch-ups and that sort of stuff. But yeah, any final words?
Just don't rely too much on preseason form, and happy drafting.
Yeah, there you go. All right, listeners. This has been Everything Spurs. I'm not sure what our next episode is. Let me see if I pull up the calendar right now. I think it's Crystal Palace, possibly. So we're still in London, all right? But you know what? Doesn't even matter. Just stay tuned. We've got a bunch of interviews coming up. Yeah, and I can't wait to get through all of them. But anyways, good luck, guys. Make sure you're doing mock drafts, right? And if you have any questions, DM to us. Jump in the Discord, right? But if not, just enjoy preseason, have fun, and we'll catch you on the next one. Peace.